Chapter 12. Layla, you're nuts, really. I don't know what you're talking about. Abby turned away, stared at the far wall, and walked quickly past Layla, hoping that Layla couldn't see her face. She sat down at the dresser table with her back to Layla, pulled open the drawer, and fumbled around inside for her lipstick. I think you do know what I'm talking about, Layla said, pronouncing each word slowly and carefully. I saw the look you gave Gordon when he showed up last night. Abby struggled not to reveal her true feelings in her voice. Look? What look? Please, Layla, don't embarrass yourself. I saw you, and you knew I saw you. Layla exploded, unable to keep her cool any longer. You're being paranoid, Layla. Abby found a liquid blusher in the drawer and, staring into the dust-smeared mirror, began frantically to apply it. What a joke, she thought. My face is as red as a stoplight, and I'm putting on blusher. Paranoid? I'm paranoid? Layla was silent for a moment, too angry to speak. Finally, she continued, forcing herself to keep her voice level and calm. Listen, Abby, let's not kid around. What's the point? I agree. I feel bad about what happened last year, but not so bad. I mean, it was Gordon's decision, right? And this kind of thing happens all the time. Kids go together. Kids break up. Kids decide to go with other people. That's what high school is about, I think. Abby froze her face, not letting any emotion show. She stared at Layla's reflection in the mirror. What is she talking about? Abby thought. Kids going together, breaking up. Doesn't she realize that Gordon and I were in love? And she ruined it. I'm sorry you took it so hard. Layla continued, moving to the window out of Abby's view in the mirror. Gordon and I, we didn't think you'd be so upset. But look, that was a year ago. Layla moved back into Abby's view. She stood right behind Abby's chair, looking at Abby's reflection in the mirror. Abby stared straight ahead, looking back at Layla. That was a year ago, Layla repeated. It's been all over between you and Gordon for a year. Remember that, Abby? I mean it. You stay away from Gordon. A chill ran up Abby's neck. She spun around furious. If Layla hadn't taken a step back, Abby would have kicked her. Don't you threaten me, Abby screamed, leaping to her feet, tossing the bottle of blusher at Layla. It sailed over Layla's head and shattered against the wall. Don't you ever threaten me. Layla took another step back. She looked surprised. Had she expected Abby just to crumble or to beg for forgiveness? Maybe she wasn't used to people reacting as furiously as she always did. Well, Layla looked at the door as if planning her escape. I guess I've said what I have to say. I guess you have, Abby said, her cat eyes narrowed in hatred and fury. I wanted to see how Nina's doing, Layla said, and walked quickly with long strides out of the room. When she was gone, Abby slumped back into the chair in front of the dressing table. She had to cry. She needed to cry. No, she said out loud. No, I won't. And she held back the tears, held back the shivers, the chills, held back all of her feelings. What a horrible day. It was early afternoon, but she felt exhausted, completely drained, broken. That's it. I feel broken, she told herself. Broken. Broken. The word began to repeat itself in her mind until it lost all meaning. She stared into the mirror. She had to force her eyes to focus. Her face was a blur, surrounded by her short, black hair. But then she didn't look too bad. A little lipstick and she looked just about normal. Normal? Another word that had lost all meaning. Gordon flashed into her mind. Yes, Gordon, she thought. He's probably still here in this house. He's here. Suddenly, a familiar voice shadowed her vision of him. What's the matter, Abby? Sobriety life getting you down? Abby let out a short gasp. Gabriella? I don't believe it. What are you doing here? You don't sound glad to see me, Gabriella said with an exaggerated pout. I'm just totally shocked. You always did shock easily, Gabriella replied. There was no warmth in her tone. She was putting Abby down, as usual. How did you get here? Abby turned to the mirror and picked up her lipstick. It wasn't hard to figure out where they were going to take you, Gabriella said. But why did you come? Abby asked impatiently. I don't like being left out. Gabriella's reflection grinned at Abby. Abby was really confused. She gripped the edge of the dressing table and held onto it tightly. But you can't just come here, Gabriella. I'm here, Gabriella said, her grin widening, her dark lips tightly set against her pale white skin. But you weren't invited, Abby insisted. Invited? Gabriella laughed, but quickly cut the laugh short. Don't worry, Abby. I won't embarrass you in front of your classy sorority pals. I didn't come to embarrass you. Gabriella laughed again in a quiet, dry laugh. I've come for a very different reason. What? What are you talking about? Tell me, Abby demanded. Abby spun around, but Gabriella had left the room. Broken, Abby thought. Broken, broken, broken. She turned back to the mirror and picked up the lipstick. Broken, broken, broken. Looking intently into the mirror, she began applying the lipstick to her lips, lightly at first, and then pressing harder and harder. Her hand moved in quick circles, smearing the soft lipstick over her lips, on her chin, under her nose, round and round, round and round. She smeared the lipstick in wider and wider circles, covering her lower face, and then her cheeks. She stared into the mirror, admiring her work, round and round, bigger and bigger circles, until her mouth, her chin, her cheeks were all red, blood red. Chapter 13. The thing to remember is, Jessie said, staring straight ahead at the tall green weeds that blanketed the dune, that no matter what that idiot Andrea says, we're all in this together. Nina leaned her head against the wooden back of the rickety old porch swing and stared up at the sky. Black clouds were rolling in from above the ocean, covering the sun and bringing a wet chill to the afternoon air. Looks like it's going to storm, Nina said quietly. She looked around the large porch that stretched the length of the house. The screens were all torn or missing. There wouldn't be much protection from the rain back here. I'm glad you've calmed down, Jessie said, watching a group of sparrows hopping around on the sand under the tall weeds. Talking to you helped a lot, Nina said. Jessie wasn't such a bad person, she decided. She was weird, but she had a certain honesty about her. She was what she was, nothing more or less. And that was refreshing compared to a lot of other girls Nina knew, with their hang-ups and disguises and phony poses. What's going to happen? She asked, looking over to Jessie. Do you think Andrea will go call the police? For some strange reason, Jessie laughed. No, I don't, she said. She was watching a tall gray tern pecking at the sparrow's wings with its long beak, trying to chase them away. There was a lot of chirping and rustling of the tall weeds as the unhappy sparrows made their escape. I wouldn't worry about Andrea. Jessie was being very mysterious. Nina frowned, watching the tern strut about, enjoying its territorial victory. Then maybe we'll go home this afternoon, she said. Nope, we can't do that, Jessie said. She picked a stone up off the porch and heaved it at the tern. It missed by a mile. The strutting bird pretended not to notice. The driver took the bus and left until tomorrow night. He had another job on the South Shore this evening. You mean we're prisoners here? The panic slipped back into Nina's voice. Jessie laughed again. I guess. Why did she keep laughing like that? Nina wondered. What was so funny? She watched Jessie throw another pebble up the tern. Maybe we should go in, Nina said. It's getting real dark. It's really going to pour. I'm starving, Jessie said. We forgot about lunch. Nina looked at her. How can you think about eating after this morning? I'm a growing girl, Jessie said, smiling at her warmly. Let's go down to the kitchen. And a loud noise nearby caused Jessie to stop. She had started to climb to her feet, but the surprise of the noise sent her sprawling back onto the porch swing. The swing creaked under her weight and hit the back of the porch. That was a gunshot, Jessie cried. What? Nina's mouth dropped open, her lips forming a wide O of fear. A gun? The color returned to Jessie's face. She shook her head as if scolding herself and laughed again. Whew, that scared me, but it's nothing, Jessie said. Duck hunters, probably, across the dune. It's duck season, you know. Oh, right. Nina took a deep breath. Of course, duck hunters. She shivered. Let's go in. That wind is so cold. Shh. Jessie raised an arm to hold her back. Nina, look. Jessie whispered. She pointed toward the tall weeds at the edge of the dune. What is it? Nina whispered back, but she quickly saw what Jessie was pointing at. Someone was running through the weeds, bent low, running at full speed. It was a man. At first she thought it was an old man since he was so bent over. Then she realized that a bent-up old man wouldn't be running that fast. Who on earth? Jessie whispered, still holding on to Nina. Nina stared at the running figure. The black clouds shut out of the sunlight now. It was nearly as dark as night, an eerie darkness, thick grays overlapping dense, somber greens. But even in the heavy darkness of the approaching storm, Nina recognized the mysterious runner. Oh, good Lord, she cried. It's Gordon. What, you know him? Jessie cried. They didn't have to whisper. The wind was strong enough to drown out their voices. Well, yes, I do, Nina said, standing up. It's Gordon, Layla's boyfriend. What is he doing here, and why is he running like that? Jessie pulled her broad shoulders up into a shrug. Weird, she said, and gave Nina a half smile. She looked at her watch, a big, clunky jogger's watch. Hey, 3:00. Time to go in and face the music. She laughed as if she had just made a really clever joke. Nina frowned. What's so funny, she thought. She opened the screen door and stepped in quickly, glad to be in from the approaching storm, but she knew that the old house held no safety or protection for her, and no escape from the horrors of the morning. The panic returned to the pit of her stomach as she walked quickly up to the living room into the meeting. Who let the fire die down? Well, as you keep reminding us you were here all day, Ruby, Emily scolded. You could have tended the fire. She raised a wad of tissues to her nose. She was catching a cold. I stayed upstairs, Ruby answered, shrugging. Besides, no one told me to take charge of the fire. Ruby, it's only common sense, Emily started, but a sneeze interrupted her. Without saying a word, Rebecca strode quickly over to the fireplace, picked up a handful of kindling, and tossed it onto the dying red embers. She found the long wooden matches in a container on the mantel and bent down to light the kindling and revive the fire. We can't start arguing over silly things like the fire, she said, her little voice sounding hoarse and tired. We have more important things to decide. She's right, Ruby agreed quickly. I think we all should go with Andrea to the nearest house. We could phone the police and then phone for rides to get us. Layla, Nina called across the room. Layla looked up. Did you know that Gordon... Layla raised her finger to her lips to shush Nina and quickly looked away. A loud rumble of thunder startled them all. It was followed by a powerful rush of wind and the drumming of large raindrops against the window. Somebody close the window, Emily cried. Why don't you do it, Jessie said. Why don't you? You're closest, Ruby said nastily. Abby suddenly felt quite sick. These weren't the same girls who had come out to the house the day before. These weren't the sophisticated sorority sisters she had hoped to be sharing an adventure with. They all looked terrible, and they were all acting like a bunch of whiny 4-year-olds. She raised a hand to her chin. It was still a little sore from all the rubbing she had to do to remove the lipstick. Her whole face felt raw and tingly. All of the silly things. She looked over at Layla, who was sitting on the floor near the fireplace. Her hair was unbrushed in the back of her sweater and untucked. And the back of her sweater was untucked. Even Layla has fallen apart, Abby thought, broken. Do I have to do everything? Rebecca cried, reaching up her long arms to pull down the rain-spotted window. We've got to get out of here, Nina said, holding the sides of her armchair tightly. Do you want to go out in this? Emily said, gesturing to the window. The rain was pounding the ground, swirled by the strong winds, accompanied by long roars of thunder. The next house is at least a mile away. No, Nina said quietly, retreating back into her chair. The lights flickered. Nina and Rebecca shrieked. The first thing we have to do, Layla said, getting up and walking over to the fire to warm her hands, is lighten up. Rebecca picked up a large birch log with some difficulty and heaved it into the fire, sending up a rush of flames and sparks. Layla jumped back as sparks flew from the fireplace. She gave Rebecca a dirty look, but Rebecca was busily picking up another log from the basket in the corner and didn't see her. The second thing we have to do is to realize that this is supposed to be torture time. That's what it's all about. Come on, Layla, Jessie interrupted, but Layla vehemently told her to shush. So we could take our torture like good little girls, Layla continued, turning her back to the fire and staring at Abby for some reason, like good little sorority girls, I mean. And when Andrea tells us it was all a joke, we can tell each other how we knew it all along and congratulate ourselves for our courage and for making it as trigrams. But it's not a joke, Jessie insisted, jumping to her feet, looking as if she might rush forward and attack Layla. Layla let out an exasperated sigh and rolled her eyes. Layla, Nina called quietly, her face buried in shadows. How can it be a joke? You're kidding yourself, Layla, Jessie said, walking to the window and staring out at the sheets of rain. You're lying to yourself. Sure, we all want it to be a joke, but we don't always get what we want. Let me finish what I started to say, Layla said, reaching behind her to tuck in her sweater. We either play along like we're supposed to, or we just tell Andrea that the game is over. We don't want to play anymore. Hey, Abby cried loudly. She had been silent the whole time, and everyone jumped at the sound of her voice. Where is Andrea? They all looked around the room as if Andrea might be hiding somewhere watching them, but there was no sign of her. She's never late, Layla said, starting to pace back and forth in front of the fire. Sit down, Layla. You're making me nervous, Emily said crossly. Your face makes me nervous, Jessie cracked. Stop it! Stop it! Abby shouted. She realized immediately from the looks on their faces that she had reacted a little too violently. We've got to find Andrea, she said, forcing her voice down. She probably fell asleep in her room, Layla suggested. Come on, let's go get her. Layla headed to the stairway, and they all trooped behind her. A long streak of lightning crackled outside the window, and the lights dimmed and then slowly brightened. They went down the long hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath their shoes. Andrea's room was the last one on the left. The door was closed. Layla knocked softly, then harder. Andrea? Andrea, wake up! Silence. Open the door, Nina cried impatiently. Jessie pushed her way forward, grabbed the big glass doorknob, and turned it. She pushed the door open, and they all began to step inside. The lamp on the bed table cast dim yellow light over the large bedroom. Andrea? Jessie called. Oh, no. No, please, no. First they saw her white stockinged feet lying on the floor on the other side of the bed, pointing straight up. Then they saw the dark pool of blood. Their screams and cries echoed down the long, empty hallway. No one moved. Finally, Jessie walked over to the bed and looked down. She's been shot! More screams and cries. Abby grabbed onto Nina, trying desperately not to faint to the floor. Nina buried her head in Abby's sweater. Is she dead? Rebecca managed to whisper, looking away. Yes, Jessie said, sounding more angry than upset. Andrea's dead. The other girls began to push into the room. Stay back, Jessie warned. We can't move anything. We can't touch anything. The police won't want anything in the room disturbed. Then she pushed herself away from the bed and looked up at Layla. Still think this is a joke, Layla? Chapter 14. We've got to find a phone. There's got to be a phone somewhere in this house. Rebecca, her face a ghastly yellow in the dim lamplight of the living room, began dashing frantically from table to table, pushing aside vases and lamps, her long, slender hands searching every surface for a phone. Rebecca, sit down, Layla called firmly, pointing to a vacant armchair by the fire. Ouch! Rebecca knocked a large glass ashtray off an end table. It bounced heavily off her foot and shattered. Rebecca raised her hands to pull her long hair, red hair, and let out a long, high-pitched shriek. Rebecca, Layla called impatiently. That isn't doing anyone any good. Try to think of everyone else. We can't start thinking only about ourselves. Now we're all really in this together, every one of us. Ruby scowled, walked over quickly, and put an arm around Rebecca's waist. Talking to her softly, she led her back to the others and helped her sit down in the armchair by the fire. Abby stared down at the shattered ashtray beneath the end table. Broken, she thought. Broken, and it will never be put back together again. The rain continued to batter the wide double windows behind them. Outside the windows, the tall weeds of the dune, unable to stand up to the powerful gusts of wind, were crushed flat against the sand as if a steamroller had gone over them. The lights flickered again, causing several girls to gasp. Darkness, Abby thought. Soon we will all be cast into darkness. Jessie disappeared into the kitchen for a moment, then returned with a handful of long green candles. Just as she began to pass them out, the lights dimmed, darkened, and stayed dark. No, I don't believe it, Rebecca's little voice cried. They could see her cover her face with her hands in the flickering firelight. Shadows danced and tossed about the room. Rebecca, do you want to go upstairs and lie down? Layla asked. Matches were struck by shaking hands. Circles of yellow candlelight cast an eerie, old-fashioned glow. No, please, Rebecca mistook Layla's offer as a threat. Don't make me go up there. I'm not making you go, Layla said softly. I thought it might help you to lie down for a bit. Not up there, Rebecca said in a shaky voice. We have to call the police. We can't just leave Andrea lying up there, Emily said. Her parents, Nina said between sobs. I'm not going out in that storm, Ruby insisted. It's safer than staying in here. Anything is safer than staying in here. Poor Andrea, Rebecca cried. A howling gust of wind pushed hard against the windows. Their eyes all turned to see if the glass would stand up to it. The windows shook, rattled, but didn't break. The wind continued to howl. The ceiling above their heads creaked. Abby, why did you get up? Layla called, raising her candle in front of her to see better. Abby stared into Layla's candle flame. She hadn't realized she had climbed off the sofa. One of us is a killer, she said in a flat voice, a dead voice she didn't recognize. Abby, please, Layla started softly. No, Nina suddenly cried out through her sobs and hiccups. One of us is a killer, Abby repeated in her emotionless new voice. It's you, Jessie, isn't it? What? Jessie cried. Me? Why me? We all saw you threaten Andrea, Abby said in a flat, emotionless tone that made her words even more chilling. Yes, that's right, Rebecca chimed in. We did. You didn't want her to phone the police because you were the one who held the gun. Now, wait, Jessie started. And you brought the gun back. I saw you, Abby added, staring into Jessie's startled face. I put the gun upstairs, Jessie said, the candle shaking in her hand. I didn't shoot Andrea or anyone else with it, Abby. How stupid can you be? It's loaded with blanks, remember? Abby shook her head. It was loaded with blanks, but bullets can be taken out and new ones put in. No, Nina cried, jumping to her feet. Jessie didn't do it. Gordon killed Andrea, she shouted, and then hiccuped loudly. What? Layla's voice rose several octaves. What did you say? What? Abby repeated. A second later, she felt her heart skip at the mention of Gordon's name. Gordon killed Andrea. Nina's candle went out. She made no attempt to relight it. She didn't even seem to notice. Who is Gordon? Emily asked. Gordon isn't here, Layla said quickly, ignoring Emily. What's wrong with you, Nina? Why would you say a thing like that? Gordon doesn't even know Andrea. Gordon is here, Layla, Nina insisted. You're lying. Jessie and I saw him. We saw him running over the dune behind the house. Another loud hiccup. First we heard a gunshot, Jessie added from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at Jessie. With the candle held in front of her face, she looked like a big jack-o'-lantern. We thought it was duck hunters, Jessie added quickly, but then we saw this guy, Gordon, running over the dune. He was bent real low, as if he didn't want to be seen. Who's Gordon? Emily repeated. Darkness, Abby thought. We're being cast into darkness. She blew out her candle and smiled. This is just silly, Layla said, trying hard not to lose control. Why would Gordon shoot Andrea? I told you, Gordon doesn't know Andrea. It had to be Jessie. Jessie was ready to kill Andrea right here in the living room. We all saw it. That's right, Abby agreed a bit too loudly. You also told us Gordon wasn't here, Nina said to Layla, hiccuping. You lied about that, didn't you? Yes, but... Layla didn't finish her sentence. She froze. Everyone froze. The sounds they heard weren't from the blowing of the wind or the creaking of the old house. The sounds that interrupted them came from the front entranceway. Someone was banging on the door. Chapter 15. Don't answer the door, please. Rebecca dropped her candle. It rolled across the carpet, still lit. Ruby grabbed it up quickly and handed it back to Rebecca. They heard the loud pounding again, 6 knocks, hard and insistent. We've got to answer the door, Jessie said, walking quickly toward the entranceway. It's only the bus driver. I'm sure he's come back to drive us home. Yes, Nina cried, starting to follow Jessie. Of course it's the bus driver. The thought seemed to have chased away her hiccups. Thank God we can get out of here. The small, shimmering circle of light from Jessie's candle led the way to the entranceway. Almost to the front door she turned and raised the candle above her head. Well, isn't anyone going to come with me? Are you all too chicken? The others followed reluctantly, circles of candlelight trembling before them as they entered the hallway and approached the front door. 4 more knocks, louder this time. Coming, we're coming, Jessie shouted, but she realized whoever was out there probably couldn't hear a thing over the pounding of the rain. She struggled with the top lock, turned the knob, and pulled open the heavy door. A burst of wind sent a wave of rainwater into the entranceway. Jessie backed away too late. She was drenched. The girls raised their candles to see who was stepping through the doorway. Gordon? Abby cried. His dark face was matted against his head. Water dripped down his face. His denim jacket was completely soaked through, as were his jeans. His black boots were mud-splattered and wet. I got caught in the storm, he said, shivering. He took a few steps away from the door, leaned forward, and shook himself like a dog, spraying water on them all. Then he stood up, a devilish grin spreading across his dripping wet face. Grab him, Nina cried. Don't let him get away. He killed Andrea. The grin died quickly on Gordon's face. He wiped his wet forehead with an even wetter hand and stared through the dim candlelight to see who was accusing him. A dark puddle of water circled him on the carpet. Who? Grab him, quick! He killed Andrea, Nina screamed. But no one wanted to touch him. He was too wet. Nina, what's the matter? Gordon asked, sounding confused. He shivered, wrapping his arms around his chest. Anyone spare a towel? Who is he? Emily asked. I'm Gordon, he told her. Why did you do it? Nina screamed, walking up close to him, looking up into his wet face. Gordon, I've known you for so long. How could you? Gordon looked down at her. He was at least a foot taller than she. How could I what? He asked. Why are you on my case, Nina? The light suddenly revived, flickered back to life. The hallway filled with yellow light. Nina and Gordon continued to stare at each other. What are you saying? That I killed somebody? Gordon was genuinely confused. Don't act so innocent. Jessie suddenly burst in, elbowing Nina out of the way to get up close to Gordon. We saw you running away. We heard the gunshot. Then we saw you, running in a crouch. She stuck her round face up close to his, challenging him. I guess you always run like that, right? Well, Gordon shrugged sheepishly. He never was much of a talker. Shivering from the cold, struggling to keep the water from running down into his eyes, confronted by these shrill, screaming girls and their accusations, he was finding it difficult to talk at all. Why were you running like that, Gordon? Nina, hidden behind Jessie, asked quietly. I guess I didn't want anyone to see me, he said reluctantly. I knew it! Nina cried. Oh, somebody help! We've got to tie him up or something. Now cool it, Nina, Gordon said, pushing Jessie out of the way so he could see her. Have you gone bonkers or something? I'm not confessing to any murder. I just said I didn't want anybody to see me leaving the house. You killed Andrea, Gordon, Nina cried. We saw you. Jessie and I saw you. You saw him shoot her? Emily asked, bewildered by the change in Nina's story. No, we saw him running, Jessie said impatiently. She moved back up to him. Why didn't you want anyone to see you leave the house? She asked, sounding tough like a bad TV detective. Well, I guess, what were you doing here in the first place? Jessie asked, coming so close to Gordon. So close, Gordon was forced to take a step back. He came to see me. Everyone turned to see who had spoken those surprising words. Abby felt her face turning red. For a second, she wished the lights hadn't come back on. I admit it, she said, staring into Gordon's eyes. He snuck into my room last night. He followed me from the campus. He wanted to see me, to be with me. Isn't that right, Gordon? Gordon's face twisted in confusion. Abby, you shouldn't. It's okay, Abby said, feeling the heat that reddened her face course through her entire body. Gordon and I were together last night, she said, unblinking, staring hard into Gordon's eyes. Look back at me, Gordon. Look back at me with the same feeling I'm sending out to you, Abby thought. But Gordon looked down at the wet carpet. He didn't want anyone to see him leave this afternoon because he didn't want to hurt my reputation. She turned away from Gordon and looked at the other girls defiantly, proudly a triumphant smile on her dark lips. No, Abby. Gordon raised his hand, gesturing for her to stop. It's the truth, Abby said, her heart pounding with gladness, with real happiness. He was with me the whole time. He didn't kill Andrea. He didn't even... It's not the truth, Gordon shouted, water spraying off the shoulders of his denim jacket. He looked across the room at Layla and shrugged. Abby, please. I guess you're just trying to help me, but you might as well tell the truth. I am, Abby insisted. What was the matter with him? Didn't he know the truth? I came to see Layla, Gordon said, still looking at the carpet. I was with Layla all night. I didn't wake up till this afternoon. Then I tried to get away without anyone seeing me. Everyone looked at Layla, who nodded agreement. No, Abby insisted, grabbing Gordon's shoulder and pushing him back. Don't you know it's all broken? Everything's broken. Surprised by her push, Gordon stumbled backwards. He regained his balance by putting a hand up onto the wall. What? He asked. What did you say? I don't remember, Abby said. She really didn't remember. Suddenly she felt very upset. Everything had been so nice, so right. Everything had been so clear to her. So why couldn't she remember what she had just said? Layla stared hard at Abby, reading the confusion on her face. Poor confused Abby, Layla thought. Poor Abby, she really believes what she's saying. Suddenly, Layla found herself trembling all over. Tears welled in her eyes. Poor Abby, poor, confused Abby. What's happening to me, Layla thought. Why do I feel so strange? Staring at Abby, she answered her own questions. In that instant, Layla realized that she still cared about her old friend a great deal. Abby was not a threat to her, she realized. Abby was in trouble. Abby and I were such good friends, she thought. We were like sisters. Surprised at her own emotions, at the strong feelings she still had for Abby, feelings she had held back for more than a year, Layla felt her anger lift, felt her guilt fade away. Poor Abby, she repeated to herself. Poor, confused Abby. Someone isn't telling the truth here, Jessie said, interrupting Layla's thoughts. Jessie moved forward to take charge, giving Abby a strange look. She grabbed Gordon's arm and forced it behind him. Come on, up you go. We're locking you in a bedroom upstairs till we can get help. Gordon made no effort to resist. Fine, he said quietly. This is stupid, Layla cried, moving forward to pull Jessie away, but Gordon raised a hand to stop her. It's okay, he said. Look, I just came in to get dry. If you want to put me in some room, fine. I'm not going to fight you. But there's no reason, Layla started. A nice dry room sounds fine to me, Gordon said. I didn't shoot anybody. I've never held a gun in my life. I didn't do anything. So go ahead. Take me upstairs. Lock me up. Just give me a towel, okay? And maybe a dry bathrobe or something. Gordon, Layla seemed positively furious that he was giving in to them. Jessie, still bending Gordon's arm behind his back, pushed him toward the steps. I'm locking him in the empty bedroom, she called down. No one knew what to say. They all stood in the entranceway for a few moments. Then they slowly began to drift back to the living room. Rebecca moved to tend to the fire, which had died to dull red embers. Layla walked up quickly to Abby, tenderly put a hand on her shoulder. Excuse me. and pulled her close, whispering in her ear, "Abby, you and I should do some talking about Gordon." Abby jerked herself out of Layla's grip. Her green cat eyes flared up as if on fire, and her dark lips formed a tight sneer. "I want to talk to you too, Layla. Come up to my room, now." Chapter 16. What's wrong with me? I can't stop crying. Nina pulled a bunch of tissues from the box Jessie held out to her. "You're lucky," Jessie said, tossing the box onto the bed beside Nina. "You can let out your emotions." "What good is that?" Nina asked, the tears beginning to fall down her swollen red cheeks again. "Everyone just thinks I'm a baby." Jessie started to contradict her, but Nina shook her head and gestured for her not to say anything. The whole reason I wanted to join to be a trigam," Nina said from behind her wad of tissues, "was to be sophisticated, mature, and all I've done is cry like an infant." She tossed the wet tissues angrily down on the bed. "I can't help it. I'm so upset." Jessie walked over to the crushed velvet armchair beside the closet and picked up her big book bag. She searched through it, pawing intently until she found what she was looking for. She grinned as she pulled out a Three Musketeers bar. "Big enough to share with a friend," Jessie said, tearing off the wrapper and tossing it on the floor. "Want half?" Nina moaned. "I couldn't, thanks. I just keep thinking about Andrea lying there 2 doors down, that blood all over the floor. Uh-oh, here I go again." She reached for another handful of tissues as the loud, uncontrollable sobs resumed. Jessie took a big bite of the candy bar, then another. "What can I say to calm you down?" she said, chocolate all over her teeth. "You know I didn't do it, don't you? I was with you the entire time." "Yes, I know," Nina said through her tears. "Well, you've got to remember you're not the only one who's in this mess. You're not responsible. We're all to blame for whatever's happened." Nina looked up at her but didn't reply. "So why do you want all the guilt on your shoulders?" Jessie continued, taking another big bite of the candy bar. "Why do you want to do all the crying for us?" "What are you accusing me of?" Nina cried, sitting up quickly. "I'm not crying because I want to take everyone's guilt. Who asked you to be my shrink anyway?" "Now wait," Jessie startled. "I'm crying because I'm upset," Nina shouted. "Upset, upset. It's normal to cry when you're upset. Some terrible things have happened here. People are dead. It's normal to cry when people—" Nina stopped suddenly and stared at Jessie. Her mouth dropped open. She looked surprised by her own thoughts. "Wait a minute," Nina said slowly, her eyes narrowing. "How come you're so calm, Jessie?" "I told you," Jessie said, setting down the remaining half of the candy bar on the dresser. "Some people can let out their emotions. Some can't." "You've been so calm through this whole thing," Nina continued, ignoring Jessie's feeble reply. "You haven't cried. You haven't seemed frightened or upset. Not for more than a minute or two, anyway." Nina stared at Jessie. "Don't you have any feelings? Are you so twisted that you don't care about people at all?" "Nina, that's not fair," Jessie said, crossing her arms in front of her chest. "Now stop." But Nina wasn't finished. She had another thought. "Maybe that isn't it at all," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe there's another reason why you're so calm, Jessie. You know what? I think you know more about what's been going on this weekend than you're letting on." Jessie turned away and looked out the window. A mysterious smile spread over her face. "You're out of your mind," she said quietly. Layla lifted the large green mug to her lips, took a long sip of the hot tea, and burned her mouth. She slammed the mug down on the kitchen table, startling a few of the other girls. "I have to do something about Abby," she thought. "But what?" After Gordon had been safely locked upstairs, someone realized they hadn't eaten since breakfast. Rebecca hurried to the kitchen to make a pot of tea. Emily, still mostly in a daze, began opening cabinet doors, looking for some ingredients to make pancakes. The others had scattered all over the house. Several minutes later, the tea had been made and poured, but Emily was still staring into cabinets, unsuccessful in her quest, seemingly unable to come up with an alternate plan. "What am I going to do?" Layla thought. A dozen scenes rushed through her mind, ugly pictures, upsetting pictures of what had taken place in the last few hours. She saw Mrs. Driftwood in her shop. She saw the gun in Jessie's hand. She saw the old lady's face begin to twitch, saw her clutch her chest and fall. She saw Andrea, or rather Andrea's stocking feet, lying in a dark pool of blood, the blood soaking onto her white socks. Then she saw Gordon climbing into her bedroom window. She saw Abby rush forward to greet him. She saw the look on Abby's face, the way she raised her arms to him. Abby was still in love with him, still crazy about him. Still crazy. But how crazy? Crazy enough to think that Gordon might come back to her? Layla decided she had to confront Abby. She had to make sure that Abby knew the truth for Abby's sake. 2 people were dead. For real. Were they really dead? Layla had been so certain that it had all been a sorority prank, so certain that it was all a put on. But now she just didn't know what to think. It was easier to think about Abby and Gordon. Layla took another long sip of tea, ignoring how hot it was. She felt empty and cold. She wanted to run upstairs to Gordon. He would know how to make her feel warm and comfortable. But Gordon was locked up in the empty bedroom. Those idiots. Layla's thoughts turned angrier. How can they be so stupid? I know Gordon. He looks tough. Sure, he looks kind of punky, but he isn't really. He's a marshmallow, she thought. Why did he give in to them so easily? Why did he let himself be dragged up to that bedroom? Why didn't he fight them just a little? Because he's a marshmallow. He didn't kill Andrea. He couldn't kill anyone. Then who did? Was it Jesse? It could have been. Jesse had been a gung-ho about this whole adventure. Jesse wanted to carry the gun. Jesse wanted to commit the crime. Jesse was the least upset of any of them. In fact, Jesse wasn't upset at all. It was Jesse. She didn't want Andrea to call the police, but she did. But did she want to stop her badly enough to kill her? No, that was ridiculous. Jesse didn't kill Andrea. But then who did? One of the other girls? I've got to stop these crazy thoughts, Layla told herself. She took one last gulp of tea, pushed her chair away from the table, and walked out of the kitchen. She realized she was shivering. The tea hadn't warmed her at all. Thunder rattled outside the front door. The rain, which had slowed for a while, picked up once again. She hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the rain, gathering her strength. Then slowly she began to climb. It was time to go up and have a chat with Abby.